Hi, welcome to session 5, and in this session we are looking at focusing on initiating and framing uh, evaluation of humanitarian action. In the previous session we looked at deciding to evaluate humanitarian action, whereby we looked at issues to do with considerations of whether the evaluation is needed or not, and for what purpose. Is it for accountability, is it for learning, or is it for both? And that itself, making such a decision would then lead to the commissioning agency or evaluation managers to focus on initiating and framing evaluation of humanitarian action. So in this session we are looking at evaluation utilization considerations, choosing evaluation questions, setting terms of reference for evaluation of humanitarian action, and considerations of budgeting. So let's get started. And as always, we remind ourselves what evaluation of humanitarian action is, so that it can keep us focused on what we're discussing. Again, systematic, objective, impartial examination of humanitarian interventions or actions, and to determine the worth, the significance, the value, and so on, to be able to draw lessons to make evidence-based policies and practices, and to enhance accountability. So in that case, how then would we initiate the evaluation? So we have to think about how evaluation results will be used, because at the end of the day, there is demand for certain information and results. Those results must, the information must be supplied through monitoring and evaluation systems of any of the agency that is being evaluated, and those evaluation results could be able to help to improve. Again, look back at the evaluation, the definition of evaluation of humanitarian action. Okay, drawing lessons, influencing policy changes, influencing and so on. So the whole idea is, while you're initiating, the managers must think about who is going to use the results, who is demanding for the results, who is going to use them, and for what purpose. Okay. So back to Patton's utilization focused evaluation model, and he states, no matter how technically sound and methodologically elegant your evaluation is, an evaluation is not truly a good evaluation unless the findings are used. Okay, so the whole idea is about planning and conducting an evaluation using those processes and strategies and whatever designs you use, to make sure that at the end of the day, or at the end of the evaluation, if those results of the evaluation are produced, they have a likelihood that there is a likelihood that they will be used, and there is a likelihood that they will inform changes and making better decisions to improve on humanitarian action. So how can evaluation be used? It can be used for accountability, that is summative use, judging worth or merit, needs versus outcomes. It could be used for learning, to improve on what is working, on what is not working. So again, making some kind of SWOT analysis to look at the threats, opportunities, and so on. And therefore, the evaluation results can help in terms of making sure that things are made better while the implementation is happening. Okay, or if they want to learn for future scaling up, or for other interventions that are relatively similar. But it could also be for developmental use, whereby new strategies, ideas, concepts, innovations as a result of the evaluation that are being made regarding certain humanitarian interventions. Okay. So learning from real life events and making better changes. Other categories of use include instrumental, whereby the results can be used as a tool for management changes and so all strategic changes or planning, or conceptual use for maybe regarding other kinds of interventions that are related to that. Or process learning for that use if it is formative, and also legitimizing use. In other words, if for instance a policy, the standards guidelines for a certain agencies that every other quarter there must be an evaluation, so can do it legitimizing the process that must be done by by policy. Why are evaluations not used sometimes? Because some evaluations are done for purposes of formality, symbolic purpose, because the policy says there must be evaluation. So it is done without any focus regarding how it will be used. Some evaluation results are misused, whereby some information is hidden. It is not the agencies and all evaluators are not transparent enough to share information, and others are biased or suppressed. Okay, others are not used because then maybe the stakeholders or intended users of the findings are not aware of those findings. Maybe the dissemination processes or communication processes were not good enough to be able to make these other stakeholders aware of the information that is there, and therefore sometimes even management failing to answer the pending questions, and therefore the evaluation has no use. Okay, so the evaluation users include all stakeholders, any institution, organization, or group that might affect the evaluation process or could be affected by the results of the evaluation in terms of usage. Then those are users of the evaluation, the intended users. Those are the stakeholders. So they can be engaged through consultations about information needs, and therefore those information needs that the evaluation team can rely on to be able to generate questions to answer those questions, and of course also finding ways of engaging users in a whole evaluation process. So to be able to understand who will use the evaluation to improve the usability of the evaluation, we must do stakeholder mapping. And the key questions are who are the evaluation stakeholders? Are they direct or indirect? Do they have direct or direct interest? What are their motives? Which ones have direct or indirect intentions to use the evaluation, and who are the primary intended users? So we use this analysis and questions to be able to map out those that are primarily would be able to utilize the evaluation. So what are the information needs for certain stakeholders, what motivates them, and what are they interested in regarding the evaluation that is being carried out? How could they contribute the information needs through, could it be through desk reviews, or through certain reports, or through engaging them in the fieldwork process to give us information such as key informants and so on. For instance, the donors could be interested and they need information on how the cash or the funds have been flowing. Okay, so they have potential impact. And then how can we best interact with them through meetings or workshops or whatever to be able to engage in generating the results? So Lodi, Haviland, and even you can find this in Buchanan Smith and others, they use this categorization of power versus interest, that the evaluation should be able to manage closely those with high interest and with high interest and high power, and they should be able also to keep those with low interest keep them satisfied so that at least they stay in the process. But also they should be able to keep those informed, those that have low power but have high interest should be able to be informed, and then keep monitoring those that are have low interest and low power, especially the affected population. Okay, so involving primary intended users could be through compiling terms of references. They could be part of the evaluation team members, especially in humanitarian contexts where you need to be sure to get familiar with the context. You need people who are familiar with the context. They can be part of data analysis through, for instance, participatory methods of analysis. They could be part of drafting the recommendations and making sure they clarify them before being disseminated. They could be part of the decision making to decide on what possible action could take place. For instance, if you are working with the affected, to work on recovery, or reconstruction after the shocks, experiencing the shocks of a crisis, or when they are preparing for a certain crisis to happen. So some decisions must be made, and the affected people or those that would be affected could be part of the process to make decisions. And the role of the affected people in the evaluation is that they could actually help in making sure that the evaluation stays focused, and they could also help in generating evaluation questions that would later be answered to be able to improve on policies and practices, and also making better decisions and recommendations. So there are several factors that affect use of evaluation, and these include organizational context, such as learning culture. If the organization is more open to accept that people can use all different mechanisms to learn, then that is okay. But if it's closed to learning culture, then that might affect the way evaluation results are used. If evaluation quality is poor and the evaluation was done poorly, then it means that the final products, recommendations and conclusions and findings are poor, and therefore they cannot help to influence better decisions. If the relationships and linkages between evaluators themselves, or evaluators with managers, or evaluators with evaluation users, if such relations are not good, then that might affect how communication or dissemination of evaluation results can be done, and that would affect the usage. But there are other factors that could affect evaluation evaluation use, such as policies. Okay, maybe external policies, government policies that influence how, for instance, information is generated and disseminated and so on. Okay. So, of course, also we must put into consideration the organization evaluation capacity areas that might affect how evaluation would be done and also used. So, leadership culture, I just talked about that, organizational culture, learning culture, structure and resources. If they are not available, if the organization does not have a good learning culture, a good leadership and management, better M&E structures or resources to invest in evaluation, then that might influence what type of evaluation will happen and to what extent. If the purpose of evaluation and the demands of the information are not clear enough, if the strategy is not very well laid to be able to do a better evaluation, then that could affect the results. If the evaluation systems, M&E, for instance, M&E systems, whereby the demand and supply issues are at play, then information quality might not be good for usage at the end. So whenever the team is, the management is trying to frame and initiate evaluation, it must think about all these different aspects to evaluate whether it has the capacity to consume or implement evaluation. results. So what type of evaluation is needed matters, and of course some considerations when deciding about the type of evaluation to be done include scope. It could be in terms of coverage and so on, or theme, or cluster, or sector, or whatever. Results, what kind of results are needed to answer certain questions, when will it be done in terms of timing, the number of actors that need to be involved, stakeholders that are carrying out the evaluation. Do you also involve the affected people, and any other aspects that of focus, such as technology and other structures? Okay, so we can categorize the different evaluation types according to these considerations. So let's begin with scope. So these are some of the types of evaluations that could be categorized according to scope. So is it a project evaluation? Is it in-country program evaluation? Are you focusing on UN clusters, for instance, education, water, health, and so on, food, and so on? Are you looking at pattern evaluation, where you are engaging into where you want to evaluate the partners that are engaged with you in humanitarian action? Are you focusing on certain theme as part of the scope, or are you looking at the whole agency? Okay, so those are different types according to scope. When it comes to levels of evaluation, one might decide to do evaluation at impact level, that is at the end of, after closure of the evaluation, the implementation, or they might decide to do during when the implementation is happening, or they might decide to do a normative evaluation, which looks at what was planned versus what is being implemented. So in that case, maybe one wants to test cost effectiveness or cost efficiency regarding how resources are being done. So this could be good, for instance, for accountability purposes. Then could be evaluations with different timing. So it could be real-time evaluation, which is done while humanitarian operations are happening, to be able to learn from real-time events, and then you learn to make changes and so on. Could be mid-term evaluation, which is related also to process evaluation, or it could be also formative evaluation if you want, or it could be ex-post evaluation, which is done at the end, and it could be ex-ante evaluation, which is done at the beginning before the project is implemented, or it could be ongoing evaluation. So this is about timing. Okay, again, it depends on the type of evaluation that the managers are interested in. But the evaluations could be in terms of different of the number of actors that are part. So could be a single agency evaluation, that the commissioning agency wants to do evaluation on its own projects. It could be that it wants to do a joint evaluation, whereby, since we have many actors within the evaluation system and they are also doing similar projects, partnering, doing similar projects, it could be that they want to do a joint kind of evaluation. Maybe it could be between a donor, an NGO and government, or between NGOs, or between a government and government. So it doesn't matter. But as long as there are more actors, they could decide to do a joint evaluation. Or they could decide to do a system-wide evaluation that captures the entire humanitarian system, where you have all these different actors working together, and at the center you have the affected population. It also could be carried out in terms of types of evaluation according to the different stakeholders. Is it an external or independent evaluation that would be done by external team or consultants that are not part of the agency that is being evaluated, or it's internal evaluators that are going to carry out the evaluation, which can be looked at as self-evaluation, or it's participatory evaluation, whereby all different stakeholders are going to be part, or even having a mix of both external plus internal staff members of the agency. Other types of evaluation could focus on other aspects such as technological evaluation, institutional evaluation, policy evaluation, to look at whether policy is actually having impact on certain humanitarian action. Could be meta-evaluation, whereby you are doing evaluation of evaluations that have already been done to be able to aggregate the findings and make decisions and make other recommendations. Or it could be a synthesis of findings that were made on a certain intervention. So when that decision has been taken regarding what kind of evaluation, for what use, and who will use them, regarding stakeholders and so on, then the management must move forward to frame the evaluation. And in this case, framing evaluation, it looks at kind of identifying and establishing those structures that would later on help to translate evaluation question into specific, general evaluation questions into specific questions, because there is always this overarching question that must be answered, of course, depending on what we've just talked about regarding types of evaluation. But then you must, the management must rely on that to dissect such overarching question into specific questions. Does it want to look at questions of causality, or events versus effects, or it's looking at normative questions? And the choice depends on the context. Okay, so for instance, choice of normative questions in different in difficulties of establishing attribution. Okay, so it matters a lot on what kind of questions that the evaluation must consider. But of course, most significantly, it's about concentrating on those issues that are affecting the people. So in this case, you have the whole process from evaluation scope towards the final evaluation, and through our discussions and through the subsequent sessions, we shall be looking at the entire process and its flow. Okay, so now we are focusing on evaluation scope and approach, and also evaluation questions and establishing terms of references. Okay, so just right here backwards. Okay, so we are moving from here up to around before the team is selected. Okay, so when it comes to framing the evaluation, mostly management relies on program logics. Okay, and the program logic mostly has to do with program theory. How are inputs plus activities expected to contribute to the overall goal? Okay, so if you have your inputs, that is resources, for instance, and you invest them through activities, would they be able to produce outputs and then produce outcomes and then be able to achieve overall impact? Okay, so sometimes the most common thing is the program logic always looking at the causal linkages between the different aspects of the program. Okay, so the logic models are convenient simplifications of that complex reality. Therefore, simplifying it in some kind of a linear way to see how different results cause the other progressive results. But of course, in reality, we know it's a more complex thing, and you have all other factors that affect the flow of results. Okay, and that can be also conceptualized within the conceptual framework. So the program logics can be presented in graphics or tabular. So you have the logical frameworks, you have complex diagrams, and you have theory of change and conceptual frameworks, and so on. So let's take a look at this. Then we begin with the conceptual framework. So the logic models are sometimes expressed in a way of showing what kind of different factors that affect a certain situation while carrying out humanitarian action. And to be able to make sure that we capture that, to be able to make sure that the managers capture all these different factors that could fail or help in success, help the intervention to be successful. All those aspects and risks and factors must be put into consideration. It could be policies, it could be culture and language, it could be socio-economic aspects within the environment, or it could be the magnitude of the humanitarian situations and other external factors. So all those are put into considerations and conceptualized so that at the end of the day, while the other logic models such as logical framework are put into are being constructed, they are also focusing on these other factors that if they are held, for instance, positive, that if, for instance, the policy environment is positive in this country, in a certain country, then a certain humanitarian action should be able to cause positive changes. The second one is logical framework, which expresses the linkages between activities, outputs, and of course outcomes and impact. So you have the results level, which are these. From activities you go to outputs, you go to outcomes, which is purpose, and you go to impact, which is core. But of course you must have look at indicators. So the logical framework also identifies the indicators on how these goals will be measured, and then you have means of verification, and then you have assumptions. So let's look at some of the explanation of these elements. So the activities are a combination of tasks that use inputs, to be able to carry out humanitarian action. Take an example. It's say you want to carry out a project, an intervention on cash transfer to households of a certain area that is recovering from humanitarian crisis. So you have donors who have donated resources and money and so on. So a combination of different activity tasks are made to be able to put into use of these resources, and the immediate results of a combination of those resources and activities are outputs. Okay, it could be in terms of goods, maybe goods and services. So maybe the cash was given to each household certain amount, maybe 500 or so, whatever. And the moment these households or the affected people receive the cash transfers, they should be able to use the cash transfers to invest in other aspects of household to improve their livelihoods. Could be in health, could be in education, could be in agriculture, farming, and so on. Okay, so therefore you expect, but sometimes you expect intended or unintended results, or positive or negative. Maybe they could use the money to drink alcohol, to be able to put off the pressures that have and shocks that have been brought by the losses incurred during the crisis, and that is unintended. Or the intended and positive could be that they have actually used the money maybe to purchase agricultural inputs and they are able to farm and so on. So let's assume they have used the cash transfers to purchase agricultural inputs and work on their farms and improve agricultural produce, and therefore that could have an effect, on a positive effect, for instance, on reduced malnutrition and better calorie intake and so on. Okay. And then so in that case the impact or goal are broad effects, and they could be positive or negative at micro level or macro level. They could be short or long term. So you have indicators. Remember, we talked about indicators, means of verification, and assumptions. Okay, these are indicators, these are means of verification. So the indicator, this should be showing that you have been able to how you measure what kind of impact or purpose or input you have achieved. And then the means of verification is, for instance, the research designs or data collection methods to get information that will show how much you have been able to achieve in terms of results, and the assumptions are the risk factors that may affect progress or achievement of the results that we've just explained here. Okay, outputs, purpose, and goal. Okay. Then the third, we have results chain, which is a more flexible approach, and of course it shows it shows how inputs are intended to lead to how inputs are intended to lead to long-term changes, or in that case impact. And we have, of course, the expressions here. So again, I've already talked about these earlier, but they are part of the result chain and the flow. So you have inputs such as resources. If you add them with activities in terms of work done, then you can produce goods and services, which are the immediate results. But those immediate results, if they are also put into action, then they can create change that is needed to be achieved, and then that would result in aspired long-term changes. Take an example. You have donations, and they have been used to purchase food, and then better food, and then the food is distributed as part of the activities among refugees or internally displaced persons, and then people can be able to use that food to eat and then improve. If they use that to eat, then that itself can help in maybe a change in eating behaviors and also uptake of calories, and then therefore at the end it could be able to maybe help in reducing hunger among marginalized people or refugees, but also maybe reducing on malnutrition cases among children within refugee. So you see, that's how the flow is. So you have the inputs. Okay, again, I'm repeating what I've just said. It's now, let's use another example. Let's say they are high, let's say within the refugee settings, they are high levels of maybe what can we say? Maybe malaria cases, malaria incidents. Okay, death because of malaria. So inputs, you could say maybe you decide to distribute mosquito nets. Okay, so you have your money, and then activities, you distribute mosquito nets. If you distribute mosquito nets, then people should be able to receive the mosquito nets and therefore put them into use. If they put them into use, then you should be able to reduce on malaria case incidents, and then the impact, you have reduced death rates because of malaria within a certain region. But again, from inputs we move towards long-term goals, and the more we move from short-term towards long-term, the lower the attribution gets. Okay, the lower the attribution gets. So in other words, at the levels of inputs, activities, and outputs, the management of the humanitarian action have more control of and they can be able to attribute the results to the specific intervention. But beyond outcomes and impact, the attribution keeps reducing, because, for instance, in humanitarian situations, you have even other actors or other agencies that are implementing, for instance, other humanitarian intervention towards addressing the same issue. It could be directly or indirect. So in that case, you cannot managers cannot entirely say that, okay, the impacts and outcomes can be attributed to our intervention of distribution of malaria. It could be that while some agency is distributing mosquito nets, others are actually clearing the swamps whereby mosquitoes breed, or they are working on other hygiene issues as and sanitation, or maybe they are training people on how to use how to avoid malaria, catching malaria and so on. So it is difficult to attribute changes beyond in outputs. Then we have the theory of change, which describes mechanisms on how change comes about among individuals, groups, or communities. And of course, mainly it looks at the causal linkages between the results. Okay, so for instance, the question there would be, okay, if we give cash transfers or vouchers for accessing health services, how does that improve on health among those that are affected by a certain crisis? Okay, so you have also evaluation frameworks which must also be put into consideration. For instance, agencies such as UN, the UN agencies have their own frameworks, guidelines that guide how they should do their evaluation. But you also have international law and humanitarian interventions that must guide how your evaluation would be done. You have also system-wide standards, codes of conduct on how to do it. For instance, the Red Cross has codes of conduct on how humanitarian actors must conduct themselves. You have sector-based standards, health sector, or standards for education within sector or agriculture and so on. You have agency standards. For instance, the agencies that are being evaluated have their own guidelines and standards on how certain issues must be done. But also you have local standards and guides, such as national policies, that would influence how certain evaluations can be done by evaluators. So these are some of the considerations that might be put into considerations while trying to frame the evaluation. Okay. Then, of course, you must choose questions, and the questions that are selected must be able to should be able to answer or provide to generate findings or results that would answer the needs of stakeholders, especially primary intended stakeholders. And you have different categories of questions. You have top level questions. For instance, how effective was distribution of mosquito nets? How effective was the distribution of money for assistance or food? Then there is actual evaluation questions derived from top level questions, and then you have questions asked for, of course, data questions through interviews and so on. Okay, so choosing questions depends on, of course, many issues, but also the question choice has an impact on the quality of evaluation, the quality of results that you will produce. If you have too many questions, then you might not get enough time to go in depth, okay, because the respondents or participants might not have that time to engage through all those questions. And then you have poor questions that are ambiguous, are not well stated, they are not specific, they are not smart, they are not time bound, they are not. So those could also make one lose focus. You have questions that are best answered by some means, but you intend to choose to use other means, such as qualitative versus quantitative methods or techniques, and then questions that cannot find answers for use. Okay, so choosing questions determine and influence the whole process. The whole process, from type of evaluation, as we just talked about, to even evaluation utilization, because the whole process of questioning, the whole process of designing, the whole process of choosing evaluation team, the whole process of inception report and designing everything will depend on the questions that you want to answer, because you must stay focused. The questions help you stay focused on the kind of evaluation that you want to be done. So all evaluations call for questions. Not all evaluations call for questions, because there are those evaluations that can be just derived from existing information, that you do not need to design questions, but you can find answers within the information that is there. So some evaluations rely on objectives and table matrices, and then they provide answers that are needed. So we've moved from scope and approach, and we have been talking about, of course, now we've started talking about questions, because it's questions that are going to guide the next phases. Okay, so the type of questions, what kind of type of questions that could be asked? So you have descriptive questions. For instance, a descriptive question could be, how did the affected people use the water sources that were provided, boreholes or spring or whatever, tapped water? Or how did the affected people use the food that was supplied? Did they sell it to get money to get other needs, or they used it for their own, or did they use it for farming? Normative questions: to what extent, for instance, did the quality of food distributed meet the standards, the set standards? Because, for instance, the UNFP or World Food Organization can say, okay, we must provide this kind of standard of food. So according to those standards, the normative questions could be, okay, for instance, to what extent did the food that was purchased, so in terms of quality and quantity, meet the standards? Okay. Causal questions: to what extent did, for instance, food supply influence changes? To what extent did cash transfers improve social capital, or corrective action, or improve general livelihoods of the affected? Evaluative question: was the intervention, or for instance, was the distribution of food worth it? Did it have any value? What are some of the options that would have other options that would be done? Okay, was was provision of cash transfer worth it? Okay, that is an evaluative question. You have action-oriented questions: how could we better intervene in terms of cash transfers, or in terms of distribution of food, or in terms of constructing shelters, or in terms of distributing aid that has been provided? So the number of questions matters. Too many questions, too long reports, lack of focus, too many considerations, hard to make specific recommendations, and therefore would cause limited use of the evaluation. So reasons to limit questions is that when you limit questions, you stay focused and you can get sufficient in-depth information, but you can also evaluation can be made more useful. Okay, so you must unpack the overarching question. So now, on the other side, the questions must match some kind of criteria. So we always rely on evaluation criteria of OECD, but some other agencies add in other criteria depending on the kind of evaluation they want to do. Okay, so I've already talked about these kinds of questions, but for instance, if you are testing appropriateness, to what extent did the distribution of mosquito nets among refugees meet their needs? To what extent did, for effectiveness, to what extent did cash transfers achieve the intended objectives? To what extent, how cost effective was distribution of food? Regarding impact, what has been the impact of cash transfers. Connectedness. How has distribution of food affected other aspects? Health, education, agriculture, so on. Coverage. To what extent has, for instance, distribution of food benefited specific groups? Could be that marginalized groups such as women, children, others, disabled were not, did not actually benefit. Coherence. How coherent or consistent are the organizational policies? And of course, also, for instance, how well coordinated has been the distribution of food or provision of cash transfers. Okay, so not all criteria categories have to appear in your evaluation. It always depends on the types of questions you want to answer and the purpose of evaluation. The purpose of evaluation is very important, and that would determine the questions, and then the question will determine the whole other process. Okay, and these questions must begin with the focus on users' needs, and then consider the resources that is at hand. So after you've set your questions and so on, then you set terms of references, because it's terms of references that would define what kind of quality evaluation would be done to answer those questions. Okay, so the overall intent for terms of reference is to communicate the requirements or what is expected to be delivered when the evaluation is done. Okay, there is no standard that must be followed, universal standard that must be followed by agencies, or also different agencies have their own kinds of ways of drawing terms of references. Okay, so the team or the intended team of evaluators must respond to the terms of references through inception report. Okay, and these are some of the potential elements of terms of reference. The inception report, we shall look at it at a later stage in the next session. Okay, elements of the terms of reference could be background, evaluation purpose, evaluation framework, main evaluation questions, inception phase, data collection methods, and so on. So everything that you think could cover all aspects that could cover evaluation to produce quality results. Okay, so you must also consider the budget, of course, for inception activities, initial meetings, and so on. The fieldwork activities, that is collection of data and so on, that requires money and other resources. After fieldwork, you must convene workshops and issues to do with communication and dissemination of results and so on, engaging stakeholders to make decisions and so on. All those require money and other resources. So this has to be planned in that case. Okay. But the bottom line is that if evaluation users and uses purpose, program models, questions, terms of references are not well selected and conceptualized, the evaluation quality is at risk. Okay, so these are some of the references or resources that you could rely on for further reading, and thank you.